All right. Hello, hello, hello. Good morning. Today I wanted to talk about good things, the struggle or the challenge of good things in our life. Because I was doing my meditations this morning, really focusing on what does it take to look towards God? What does it mean to look towards God? Am I really looking to God, right? In Isaiah, it says, look to me and be saved. All we literally have to do is look to God. Right. And it reminds me, anytime I think about looking to God, I think about this story or imagery that a pastor had used years ago. I don't even remember what church I was in, but a pastor had talked about so often we think that we're far away from God, right? We've been running, we've been doing our own thing, we've been living life however we've been living life, right? Doing our thing. And it can be easy to feel like God is distant. I'm not where I used to be. And that's true because we're not where we used to be. We have, left whatever habits that we had previously, nurtured that left us in a place feeling more close, more connected to God. But here's the thing, and I'm being very particular about my words because words are important, but also because I want you to see that there's so much in the mind. So we feel distant is not the same as we are distant. Things being different doesn't necessarily mean that we cannot access that same level of depth, right? And so this pastor had used this imagery of you've been running, and you recognize, hey, Jesus and I used to be so close when I was here, but now I'm all the way over here. What's up with that? It's going to be really hard for me to get back to where I was, but it's not about getting back. It's about moving forward with a whole new capacity to love, with a whole new capacity for depth and understanding and connection. And the key to that is recognizing that in these moments where we're doing our own thing, right? In these moments where we have neglected to prioritize the things that we know when we prioritize them leave us just feeling loved and seen and held and cared for and connected. When we do that, it's not that we're far from God. It's that we've only lost sight. What have we lost sight of? We've lost sight of how God operates because we're just not spending as much time with him, right? How often have you maybe you can relate to this when you were younger, and you did something and you knew that maybe you did something and you knew that your parents weren't going to be happy with you, right? You knew your parents weren't going to be happy with you. You knew that you weren't supposed to do it. And so you decided to kind of hide, to cower because of your shame. Or maybe you even ran away from home because of your shame. That's a good example to use, right? So let's say you run away from your home because you're like, man, no one likes me, no one loves me, and I'm stupid, I messed up again. I might as well just leave because life will be better for everyone if I leave. When you come back, because inevitably when you're a kid and you run away, most of the times you come back because you realize, I don't want to live on the streets. Life, it was rough, but it wasn't that rough. And so for the majority of us, who are privileged enough to have, come from homes where we are loved for and cared, even if that love and care isn't always unconditional or doesn't always feel complete, we still have that, right? At some point we come back. And in the coming back, what's beautiful is we come back full of shame. We come back full of, oh my gosh, I'm going to be in so much trouble. We come back full of, oh, they're probably still mad at me. And guess what happens? We're embraced. Don't ever scare me like that again. I missed you. I loved you. I was so worried. Right? The temporary anger of I can't believe you did that is paired with deep love and genuine concern and care. And what supersedes any past emotions or feelings is always the joy of finding you again, of you returning, of knowing that you're safe and that you're held and that you've come back. And that's the same with God our Father, right? That's the same when we've ran and we've gone our own ways and we feel so far from God. All it is about seeing with God's eyes. Because that whole time that we were running, it's even different than our parents, right? God is chasing us the entire time. God's chasing us. And so often we feel far only because we aren't looking back, right? We haven't turned around. All we have to, we know that we're far because we've been running for so long and we're tired, but we haven't turned around. If all we did was just turn around and look, we would see God standing right there, even though we're 100,000 miles further, from where we used to be. And that was the verse that I was meditating on this morning. It was Isaiah 45:22, where it said, "Look to me and be saved." All we have to do is look to him. All we have to do is look to him. It's that simple. Look to God. That's where our salvation lies. Look to God. So the question becomes, how are we looking to God? How are we actually, actively seeing? And are we, right? To ask ourselves, am I really looking to God? Am I expecting God to, come to me and bless me and save me and help me and guide me? Like, God does do those things. He does come to me. He does save me. He does help me. He does guide me. Am I looking for that? Am I expecting it? And ultimately, am I seeking it? Meaning not just looking with like a, hey God, what can you do for me? But am I seeking in the sense that I'm putting energy, intention, and action behind seeking God? Not only waiting, God show up, bless me, save me. Now it becomes demands. But expecting that God will do it as long as I am seeking and looking and knocking, right? The door will be open. And that's I think what's key. And as we think about this question of, am I looking to God? Am I truly looking to God? Am I doing the work to, say, hey, Lord, I offer my life to you, and I know that you take it. And as you take it, I know that you are speaking to me and guiding me. And my only responsibility is to listen and submit to what you're speaking, right? And so I started this by saying I wanted to talk about good things and the challenge of good things, right? Because so often, what did I write down today in my journal? I said, oftentimes what keeps us from being mirrors of God's glory, right? And that's what we're called to be, right? We are called to be mirrors of God's glory, of God's goodness, of, the love that God has for the world. We're called to be mirrors by embodying that, but we can only embody that when we are open, right? We've got to be open. We've got to be willing. We've got to be surrendered, saying, Lord, use me. And if we're saying, Lord, use me, it means we've got to be looking, because God is always trying to use us, but he's looking for willing hearts. And so our hearts have to be willing and open. That's like step number one to really being used, right? Is, am I open? Am I willing to be open? And then am I opening myself up and actually, operating from this place of surrender so that I can be used as a vessel. And when I'm a vessel, the Spirit is moving in and through me, and thus I'm a mirror to others to see what's possible. Because when I'm a vessel, when the Spirit is moving in and through me, that's when we see miracles, signs, and wonders. That's when we see the power of faith on fire. That's when we see things beyond my human nature, because I am not acting in and out of my human nature. I am acting out of the Spirit of the living God that moves, breathes, and resides within me. Right? And so if we think about, well, what keeps us from looking to God? What keeps us from being open and willing to experience and invite God into moving in every area of our body and being? Well, to be honest, most of the time, what keeps us from being open, what keeps us from being those true mirrors where we can just reflect back the glory of God, they're in the good things, right? They're in the good things. It's the good things. The good things that often, are good. Like, hey, that's good. It's exciting. It's enticing. It feels kind of aligned. And yet, it's not the best. It's not the best. It is not the best. And I think there's like a little, a line that I want to elevate for a moment to be cautious of, because I'm a coach, right? I sit down with a lot of clients and I help them move from where they are to where they want to be. Now, the challenge there is that the majority of the clients that come to me, they are in a place of pretty good, right? I do have clients who come and they're like, man, I have this other body, and they're like, I'm burnt out. I'm on the edge of burnout and I need support. So there's like that bucket of people who I've worked with, and they tend to be the people who are coming in for more intensive support to really re-up. But then the people that I'm doing like real ongoing practice work, maintenance work, getting them out of a place of survival and into a place where they can really do, the long-term transformative, sustainable type of inner work. They're coming from a place of good, where they're like, I'm ambitious. I'm achieving a lot of my goals. On the outside, things are looking pretty good, but I'm struggling internally. I'm not knowing necessarily, what to say yes to and what to say no to. There's a lot of good opportunities coming, and I can't take them all, right? And that's why we've got to be mindful of this good, right? Because as we grow closer and closer and closer towards manifesting God's calling over our life, towards, living a life of purpose and power, of embodying God's spirit and Christ's consciousness and living from that place daily. When we're in that place, a lot of our challenge as humans is going to be around knowing how to discern something that's good from something that is for us. Because as humans, so often we think, oh, well, if it's good and it makes sense up here, then it must be for me. That's not the case, though. Because when we're operating in the Spirit, we know that the ultimate currency, the ultimate strengthening, it is coming from testing of faith. And faith is, our belief in things unseen with this physical, with the physical eyes, right? We can see it in the Spirit. We trust it in the Spirit because of the vision that God's placed on our heart, but we can't see it in the physical. And so it's about saying, are you willing to let go of what feels good, what seems good, what is good in the physical, which, you might turn down a job opportunity that on paper looks amazing and is amazing. And, you could make a whole list of pros for why this would be a wonderful job, a wonderful role, a wonderful next step to get you where you're aiming to be. But if something doesn't feel in alignment with your spirit, if God has not confirmed it, will you still say yes? Will you still say yes without God's confirmation? Or even, will you say yes when you know God's saying no? Oh, and I ask these questions because I really mean them. This is what trips us up on our walks, y'all. This is what trips us up. We know that God has spoken. And let me use myself as an example, because I found myself in this situation the other day, right? God speaks to me pretty clearly many times, most of the time, a lot of the time, where I'll know. Even if I say I don't know, it's like, girl, you just don't want to fully listen, right? And the other day, one of the things that God's been calling me into in this next chapter is really setting up a routine, a daily routine that allows me to thrive. And a big part of that means increasing my discipline to do the things today that feel hard in order to have the things tomorrow that will make my life easier, right? A mentor of mine said that. He said, if you do today the things that are hard, your life will be easy. And if you do today the things that are easy, your life will be hard. And it's the whole idea that, in order to, and I'll use, the kingdom, in order to walk into the kingdom, in order to have the riches that we've been promised and stand in our authority, it's a battle of spiritual warfare, not of flesh and blood, right? And that's where we've got to recognize that, like, it's these spiritual, how do I want to phrase this? Like, no one's coming to kill me with a knife or a gun, God forbid. But in this instance, right? No one's coming to attack me in that way. That's not how I'm warring. But how I am warring is in my habits, in my behaviors, in my thoughts, in my feelings, and living from a place of believing those thoughts and feelings as truth, because once I believe them as truth, I act out of them as truth. And once I act out of them as truth, I begin to condition myself to act out of them more and more and more. And once I act out of them more and more and more, they become habits. And once they become habits, they become patterns. And once they become, these patterns, they dictate automatically how I am, who I become. Right. And then who what my life accounts to in the end. But anyways, I could go down that rabbit hole forever. What I want to elevate is this idea that we've got to be mindful. We've got to be mindful that God is always speaking. Are we willing to hear? And if we are we opening ourselves? How are we opening ourselves? And when we do, how are we submitting to that? And when it comes to understanding the spiritual warfare that's going to present itself in our submission from our will to His, is looking for the good. Because it's easy to follow God when His voice, when you're in a really tough situation, right? And you're like, I'm burnt out. I'm a mess. Everything sucks in life, right? When we're down in the darkest despair and we hear God's voice and it says, hey, come and try this. Come and try this. Come and try this. We're more apt to hear and listen and be obedient in that. Why? Because it's easier, since there's nothing really at risk. We're in a horrible place, and we can tell ourselves, well, okay, if I were to listen to this voice, what do I really have to lose? Nothing. I'm already at my end. That's not really faith, right? That's not really faith. It doesn't take much from us. It doesn't take a sacrifice, right? It's not the work that's hard today, right? It's the work that's easy. But as we are deepening in consciousness, growing in relationship to God, becoming more and more and more like His character, those decisions are not going to be as easy. They're going to be the hard ones. If you do today what is hard, your life will be easy. Why are they hard? Because it means really walking in faith. It means really walking in faith. When I am positioned with something good that on the surface looks good, and I can think with my mind of all these ways in which this good thing will help me get from point A to point B, and point B is where I want to get, right? Now, if I know I've been hearing God say something else, now I start to doubt that. Now I start to question, even though I know in my spirit, in my being, that that's what God's spoken, I start to dilute it because I think in my rational mind, is that really God? Would he be trying to move me from something good? All these things make sense, right? And we start to rationalize how we hear and experience God. And if there's one thing I know about God, is that God does not make sense in the natural. So many things about how God functions do not make sense. Why? Because it goes against what we know as reality in this world. But again, that's not reality. The more we live in the kingdom and operate from that kingdom mindset, the more we realize that when we are living out of our flesh, we're living out of a lie. We're living out of a veil, right? We're living from behind a veil where we are not seeing the full truth of who we are, whose we are, and the power that we have within us. So the more we start living from that, tapping into that, seeing that, the more we will be called to say no to good. To say no to good. And the question becomes, will you have enough faith to trust that even those good things might not be for you just because they're good? Right? But we aren't taught how to do that as humans. We aren't. We're barely even taught how to say no to things we don't want to do, right? How many people go along with things that they know they don't want to do just because they don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, or because they feel like they have to, and then it's going to be like, if they say no, someone's going to hold it over them with guilt, right? We do all sorts of things as humans that we don't want to do simply because we fear disappointing others, or we fear the discomfort that saying no and going against what somebody else wants might cause, the friction, right? Again, that's doing today what's easy leads us to a place later on of living a life of what's hard. Why? Because now we've lived a life of compromise, where I've lived my whole life not doing anything I want to do out of fear of letting other people down. But what did I end up doing in the end? I ended up letting myself down. And that's the worst place to be. Why? Because you have to live with you. And so what's going to happen when you live your life like that? And a lot of people live their life like this, right? And they get to a place eventually where they can't stand it anymore. And then they come to me. They're like, I'm not where I thought I'd be. On the outside, everything looks great. But on the inside, I'm falling apart. Why? Because they weren't living a life of integrity. And that work does mean getting comfortable being uncomfortable, right? It does mean getting used to and learning how to see good things and not automatically assign something being good to mean that it's right, or that it's right for you right now, right? I know that was a lot of rights I put out there, but what I'm trying to say is good will often come to steal away what's great. And you are called for greatness. And I've spoken about this before when I say we're all called. Many are called, but few are chosen. So the first thing is to recognize you are called for greatness. But in order to live that calling out, something needs to happen. Because few are chosen. The calling is just the word, the spoken, right? We're all called. Many are called. Few are chosen. Why? Because in order to be chosen, you must respond to the calling. You must first hear the calling. Then you must be willing to submit to that calling. And then you must actually submit to it via response, right? Hear the calling, or be willing to hear the calling. Hear that calling, submit to it, respond, right? I know I've jumped all over. I'm even losing myself for a moment. So let me collect my notes over here from devotions, because again, I'm just here going in flow, trusting that there's something of value here in my learnings, in my reflections to benefit you, your journey and your walk, because that's what we're doing. We're walking together. And when we walk together, we strengthen one another. When we share what we're learning, what's on our heart, what God's speaking, it blesses others. God does not just give to us in order for us to keep to ourselves, but he's always looking for the maximum, right? He's always looking for maximum impact, which means maximum audience. How can he reach the most people? Well, one way he does that is by voice, right? By giving us voices, and then by giving us minds so that we can be willing to open our voice, and then by giving us his spirit to help us move past the flesh that says, oh, I don't know if there's anything of value here, or there is nothing of value here, or I don't even know what to say or how to speak, and it's not going to be, cohesive, to giving us minds that say, okay, I'm willing to get out of my own way, to bypass those thoughts and say, I don't know. And that's okay that I don't know, right? I don't feel. And that's okay that I don't feel. I don't have to feel like I have all these great gems to offer you in order to open my mouth and offer them. I don't have to feel like I know exactly what I'm going to say in my, 28-minute talk, TED Talk, with my 18-minute TED Talk, right? That has 3 key points. And I have to make them clear and concise, right? No. That's when we put ourselves first and say we know best. In order for me to be of use and of service, this is what it's got to look like, because this is what the world said it needs to look like. No, trust the Spirit. And that's, again, what this practice is about, and what I wanted to speak to today. Will you get out of your own way to really trust the Spirit, and to trust that, like, God has exceedingly and abundantly more for you. And so what we as children of the Most High have been given, the inheritance, is greatness. Not just goodness, but greatness. Is amazing, is phenomenal, is beyond measure. Which means when these good opportunities come, be very cautious. Be very cautious if there's a small part of you or a big part of you that knows this doesn't feel in alignment with what God wants. Trust it. Trust it. It can make every single sense up here in the world on paper. But if something in your spirit says, I feel like God wants me to do something else, trust that and listen to it. Good is what often will keep you complacent. Why? Because I talked earlier about, like, when you're down at the bottom, you lean into that voice of God that you're like, what could I lose? Right? There's not much to risk. But that means you're not really flexing, right? You're not really flexing that muscle of faith. And we want to flex that muscle of faith, because faith is currency. And so if we're going to flex that muscle of faith, then it means it's not always going to be easy, right? We're going to have to actually work at it to develop it. And that means there's going to be risk. And the risk is, are you willing to say goodbye to something that's good? Something that feels certain for the uncertainty. And as I say that, I want to be very mindful of my words, because God is not uncertain. God is clear. His promises are yes and amen. And when we recognize that and have faith in that, we can rest assured. But that's the key. So often we think we forget that God's promise is yes and amen, and that God is faithful to fulfill his promises. Because instead of focusing on the larger promise of God's fulfillment and his will for his glory, we focus on what we think it needs to look like, when it needs to look like, and as what it needs to look like in our minds. Right? So we think, oh, well, like, I need to have financial security. And if I feel God's calling me over here, and financially that doesn't make sense, but right now I've been given this really cool opportunity, and like on paper, this job looks so aligned, and it would give me money. Now I'm risking not having all these things. It feels uncertain, right? Because this other job felt certain. It's a paycheck, certain, right? It's a concrete job description, certain. When you look at the thing that God's calling you to, you're like, there's no certainty. There's no paycheck coming in. There's no job description. It's going to be things I didn't even, I've never done before. I don't know how to do, right? And we just focus on wow, it's so uncertain. No, it's not that it's uncertain. It's that we're looking at the wrong thing. In this moment, we're looking for a certain outcome that benefits us, right? Rather than an outcome that benefits God. Now, here's the thing. The outcome that benefits God will also benefit us. But it's just about, what are we focusing on first? Do we want to bless God, have our lives bless God and be blessed? Or do we just want our lives to be about blessing us? Let me ask that again. What's your priority, right? In another way, what's your priority? Is your priority really God, right? We trust that, God, you want me to have the desires of my heart. Yes, he does. But will you get out of your own way to allow him to give you those desires his way and in his timeline rather than in yours, right? Because that's what we do when we focus on the good. When we keep that job that we know, God's not calling us to stay at, but because it feels safe and certain. And it might even feel good, right? Sometimes we stay in those jobs, and we are scared. We're like, we don't like this job, but it's certain and it's safe, right? But other times we're like, oh, well, this is a good thing. It's learning how to say no to good things, right? Oh, and I started to give this example and I didn't finish it. So the other day, one of the things God's been calling me to do is create routine, right? More and more routine. And part of that routine is going to bed early and getting up early. So actually having a sleep routine. There's other things that I will do that I've been developing routines around that are really nice, wonderful, have been supportive. But now he's saying, okay, what's going to help you deepen in your other practices that you've been building is about you being able to have a more set container of hours each day, right? Because every day, my hours for how many hours I'm awake has been changing, and how productive those awake hours has been changing because my sleep has been all over the place. Sometimes I'm getting, 2 hours of sleep. Sometimes I'm getting 8 hours of sleep. Sometimes I'm getting 14 hours of sleep. Other times I'm getting, 3 hours of sleep, right? And it's just boom, 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 boom. Not healthy for my body, not healthy for my mind, not healthy for my spirit, not healthy for what God's trying to do in my life. And so he's told me, hey, Equesa, you're going to have to start saying no to different things that come up that your mind wants to say yes to. And some of those things are things that I know just are triggers, right? That aren't healthy for me, that are just habits that I need to break, that I am working on speaking against and breaking, right? And others of those things are, being able to say no to good things, right? So I've come a long way in terms of my work and what. Now I don't focus on consulting, but previously the majority of my income came from my consulting work. I focused on leadership development for transformative leaders, for change makers, for visionaries, activists, advocates, peace builders across the globe. And because I worked with so many people across the globe, that meant a lot of different time zones. And because my clients were all these, larger organizations that were funding these programs for grassroots change makers, a lot of the work would fall between 9 to 5, in their time. And so what that meant was when I was coming in to lead a program, facilitate a program, coach people, it would often need to fall between those hours. I, living in Asia, being 12 plus hours ahead of people in the United States, that meant the majority of my clients that were in the United States, and a lot of them were, even if not all my work was in the United States, in terms of like the leaders I was supporting, a lot of the organizations would be based in the United States. And so when I worked with their teams directly, rather than the constituencies they supported, it would definitely be US oriented. Anyways, all that to say, a lot of my time was focused on US between the hours of 9 to 5. A lot of my working hours. Now, in order for that to be conducive to me, being alive and awake during sunlight hours, and sleeping during dark hours, it meant I only had a few hours a day that I could have crossover. Now, what would end up happening is these really cool opportunities to work with amazing organizations and amazing leaders would come up. And I knew God was telling me for years. Let me tell you, I'm only now just finally getting to a place where I've closed down my consulting work and I'm focused on, just building out my experiences for women of purpose and power and focusing solely on this membership, and on this deeper spiritual work that God, to be honest, has been calling me to since 2016. Right, 2016. And that's its whole other story of how, women of purpose and power, and even just me beginning to bridge out from the traditional, leadership change maker consulting work that I was doing into more of this deeper spiritual, holistic, whole person healing, work, spiritual awakening, identity work with heart-centered, socially conscious, women of faith. But that's been a journey of submitting. But anyways, I say all this because God's been, over the years, one of the things that's made it hard for me to lean more into what I knew God was calling me to do with women of purpose and power was, because I kept saying yes to all these amazing opportunities to continue working with organizations and with change makers. However, guess what? A lot of these were at crazy times of days. I remember, I would get up at 6 a.m. to teach. I would get up at 2 a.m. I wouldn't even get up. I would just stay up till 2 a.m. to begin teaching. I would take regular calls at midnight. And it would throw off my day, right? Mind you, it's one thing to think okay, you adjust your whole schedule around that. And now let's say I wake up at 11 every day, and then I, go to bed at 3 every day. Okay, you adjust it, right? But that's not necessarily the case, because I still did, have obligations and work and clients, that could meet me in Asia, more Asia 9 to 5 types, time slots. I can't speak. There we go. And so what was happening is some nights I could make up my sleep and I could sleep in the next day, but other nights I'd have other things I needed to do. And so, it'd be, going to bed at 4 or 5 a.m. and then waking up at 7:30, 8, and not getting much sleep, or sometimes, waking up at 6. And only getting 2 hours of sleep and not quality sleep. And so one of the things God's been speaking to me is, hey, you've got to be in bed before 12. And now what he's been saying is, girl, you need to be sleeping by 10. Really, I need you to be in bed at 9. And then the more you start getting into bed at 9, the quicker you'll begin falling asleep. But we need you to be already in dreamland at 10 a.m. or at 10 p.m., no later than that. And I feel really good about that. I feel really clear. I see how that's going to support me, especially with, my new schedule where I am getting up early. I'm getting up early for my training with swim, and I'm getting up early because before I swim, I do my devotions and my readings. And I want my morning to start with that rather than starting with my swim, which means if my swims are early, then my devotions, my prayer, my praise and worship time with God needs to be, before that. And so if my swims are going to be good and I'm going to have energy, I've got to have sleep. And if I don't want to sacrifice, I've said it's a non-negotiable. I don't want to be skipping my devotions when I, stay up too late. So what that means is if I stay up late, now I'm just getting less sleep, which means then I'm sacrificing my swim ability. And I don't want to be sacrificing that either. So if I don't want to sacrifice my time with God and I don't want to sacrifice my performance, then it means I've got to go to bed on time. And if I want to go to bed on time, it means mastering these two things, right? Getting rid of old habits, right? And one of my habits, I'll be completely honest, was, I work a lot. And as an entrepreneur, that's something that I'm working on. It's like not working as much. But it's also like there's there's positives and negatives in everything. And part of that is wonderful because it's just naturally who I am. Like my mind is always thinking, my mind is always going and, creating. There's always ideas that I want to like birth, and that's wonderful. Then there's the side of that turns it into like, wait, but now we've got to do things. We've got to act on it, and it becomes to-do lists that can birth stress and anxiety and overwhelming, right? That's the downside. But so there's like the shutting off, work that I've got to do to condition myself. But because I'm going so much, what has often happened is like, my mind is tired and I'm like, I just want to not have to think. And so before I'll go to bed, I'll say, well, let me watch a series. Let me watch something, right? Let me watch TV. Let me watch a movie. Nothing wrong with the series, nothing wrong with a movie. But for me, I've recognized how often I use that as an escape. I use it as an escape from the stress and anxiety. It's not that I really want to watch the movie. It's just like, I just don't want to feel the stress and anxiety that I'm feeling when it comes to the overwhelm of things on my plate. Right? And that's what I don't like. And so we've got to be mindful of like, okay, what are those habits we have to work through and say, no, I'm not just going to watch, a movie because that's what like my body wants to do. Like the habit body part of me wants to do. I'm going to trust the other part of my body that says you are actually physically tired. Okay, say go to sleep. And by going to sleep, you are going to make tomorrow so much better. Right. But then there's the other side of that means, well, what also do I need to do about my schedule? Right. And that means for me saying no to things that might be really good in terms of opportunities to teach, to coach, to support other people that might be at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., my morning. And then that came up the other day. There's this coach that I opened up a group coaching program that felt like, it could potentially be a great step for me in terms of my growth and development. I haven't been working as consistently. Normally, I like to have a business coach that I work with. Right now I have, a spiritual coach. I have some business accountability partners, but I don't have a business coach. And so I wanted somebody that I could start working with again on business things. And I found someone, she felt great. Her coaching, I had a feeling. So when I applied, there were 2 pages. The first page didn't have any information about the times. Then the second page, so it's like I had applied first on her Instagram. The link on her Instagram, it just had sign up here, put your deposit and sign up for your first meeting. And then I went to her webpage, and her webpage, it said 12 a.m. is when like the ongoing calls are going to be. So I was like, okay, let me still sign up. I think it might be 12, but I really hope it's not, because maybe that was left over from an old one because it was on the webpage, but then like the new one that she made on the IG, doesn't have anything. So maybe she's going to wait and like see where are people located. So of course, the day came when I met with her, and she confirmed that it is at 12 a.m. Now, before even coming into this call, well, let me tell you this too. As soon as I signed up for her, I knew that she wasn't somebody that I really wanted to coach with in terms of she was going to provide me all the business things that I wanted from her. But from the business standpoint, I was looking for a coach to focus on business coaching, not necessarily as much. There's kind of two ways that I want to focus on business. One is from like a business mentorship side, and then the other is from like a business networking side. And so from her, I didn't actually think that what she had to offer in terms of where she's at and where I'm at was going to be like these groundbreaking business insight mentorship pieces. No, I didn't think that. And so I wasn't actually going to her for like coaching in particular, but what I was going to her for was I fully believe that via the group that she could curate, right? The other people that she would bring into a group coaching experience would be in a similar place as me, with aligned values as me, alongside her being, aligned values. And I think together we could create a really powerful business network that would provide, the peer level kind of coaching support and community that I needed. So anyways, long story short, before going in, I knew that okay, there's a potential that this could be at 12 a.m. Am I willing to do that for the community? And my gut answer was no. And I said, okay, well, let's see, maybe I am. And within just less than a week, I knew God had spoken to me very clearly. You're not going to work with her in this capacity, at least, at this time, in this way. I still took the call with her. I met with her. During the call, she was lovely. She was wonderful. I think, if there's a time in the future when our lives, overlap and it feels like a great alignment, wonderful. I would definitely, love to work with her, collaborate with her in some way, shape, or form as it relates to business and network growth and, just being surrounded with like-minded people who are doing business with aligned missions and visions and purposes. But I knew already. And yet I'm sitting in this call, and at the end of the call, and I think she knew too that I wasn't going to be, because I had said, hey, my one last question, I said, and this is kind of like the question, is what time does this, coaching take place? Because I have a hunch it starts at, 12 a.m. and goes to 2:30, because that's what I was seeing people posting from when I went, one of your pages had no time. The other page said 12. And then when I was going through your old IG stories, I saw people were talking about it being like a 2.5 hour coaching call. So I was like, okay, this is it's going to be from 12 to 2:30. And she kind of confirmed yeah, it is at 12. I think she said it was 90 minutes, not, but she's oftentimes I'll go over. But anyways, I knew, again, this isn't for you, Akwese. This isn't for you. And yet, what did I do at the end of the call? I said, I'm going to be honest and open. This is not staying up for this does not feel in alignment with me right now. That said, I'm going to set with it for the week and see if the Spirit speaks anything else, and she had said to me, and this is why I'm I think she knew that I knew in my spirit, in my soul, right? Because she had said, well, that's the beautiful thing about when you have standards. She's like with me, because I guess she recently just started dating and, breaking through some of her old patterns where she was, only being like matched with men lower than her, in terms of, not that she's better or greater, but in terms of weren't operating from her level of standards. And she had said, one thing I learned is like, there's a beautiful thing about standards, because standards, are, when we set a standard and actually hold it, this is my caveat, right? We've got to, it's not just about having the standard. Like the easy thing is naming the standard, right? Like we think that's hard. It's like, what standard I need? No, that's the easy part. The hard part is holding that standard, right? But she's like, hey, once you have standards, what's great about it is it makes your life easy, is what she said. Because she's like, with men, if I'm like, here's my standard and I don't accept, anything less, then it makes it easy for me to know what to say yes and no to, right? And so she had said that to me, and I was like, yeah, you're so right. And it's like, even though I know that, and even though I knew like that's why I need to say no, still what came out of my mouth was like, it's probably a no, but let me just like sit. And then as soon as I jumped out the call, I drafted an email and I sent it to her the next morning, right? I drafted an email and I was like, I literally had to laugh. As soon as like those words came out of my mouth, it felt incongruent with who I am and what I know. And then as soon as I said, okay, God, is there something else here that you want me? Like, it's a no. It's a flat out no. It was like, I just had to laugh at myself because God spoke so clearly to me. Akwese, this is not for you. This is not for you. This is not. He spoke to me in multiple ways, right? But because I'm like, oh, there could be something here to gain. I know that, yes, there could be, and there would be, right? Like, that's the thing with God. Everything in life has good in it. Everything we go through, no matter what it looks like on the surface, is designed to have some form of blessing in there, right? God is always looking to bless us, always. Even from our sorrows, to bless us. Only when we truly know the depth of sorrow can we know like the depth of joy, right? Only when we truly know the depth of anxiety and fear and overwhelm can we truly know the depth of peace and ease and safety, right? Everything is there to bless us. And so of course there's always going to be good in everything, because everything is waiting, with goodness, has the capacity for the potential to be deemed good and worthy and worthwhile, depending on how we look at it, right? Depending on how we look at it. And that's what's key. This is all about, how are you looking at things? How are you looking at things? How are you looking at them? Are you looking at them with your eyes, with your physical eyes, or are you looking at them with your spiritual eyes, with God's eyes? And that's what it all comes down to. Saying no to good things is about looking not with your physical, and saying, oh, but I could learn from this person, and oh, she'd be gathering these other people who are aligned in values, and who are, finally I'd have a community of entrepreneurs who aren't just out for, money, but who are out to live a life of purpose, and who, want their life to glorify you, God, and who want to make meaningful impact in terms of social justice and equity in the world. And also who are doing it from a place where they're healing their past drama and traumas around money, right? And they're not just doing it from this like, I've got to be, a broke missionary, or I've got to be a broke, change maker. No, they're saying, how do we leverage, business principles and practices, pairing it with kingdom principles and practice, pairing it with social justice principles and practices, and merge all three of these to have this like purposeful, powerful, impactful, strategic business, right? And so, yes, I could see all the good things that would come, but God has great. And I know the great that God's calling me towards will only come when I'm prioritizing the things he's called me to prioritize. And in order to do them better and deeper and sustain that better and deep, I've got to listen to what he's saying, which is, girl, create a habit that's going to allow you to thrive. And that means rising early, sleeping early, so that your time with me can be made a number one priority. Then your training can follow that. And then the outpouring from your time with me and your training will turn into the overflow that is what you give as your service to the world through your work with women of purpose and power. Right? And he's spoken that so clearly, but it means me being willing to walk away and say, hey, thank you for this wonderful opportunity to work together. It sounds amazing. I know it would be amazing. And I've got to listen. Not now, not this, not now. But I hope, if it's God's will, that we will reconnect and there will be a divinely aligned way for us to partner. Right? And so I know I've been talking for a while. I've been going in circles in many ways, kind of just jumping from here and there, but I trust that you are gaining something from this. I trust that it's speaking to you and where you're at. I trust that if you leave here with nothing else, that you remember your call. You remember your call. God is always calling. But he's calling not just for you to hear the call. He's calling for you to hear it and then submit to it. So you've got to be willing to hear, and then you've got to be open. You've got to open yourself to respond. And as you are responding, as you're finding yourself taking steps towards what you feel God pulling you towards, or, what you're being nudged at, or, where you're hearing these whispers, as you start moving towards those, let me be the first to say there are going to be lots of good things coming your way in the name of Jesus. And your next test is going to be about discerning what things are good that I just need to praise God for and say goodbye to. Non-attachment. Thank you, Lord, for this good thing that's coming. And I praise you in advance that even greater is coming still. Right? Trusting that it's his way, not yours. That might look like the clear way to get to where you want to go. But trust that God's way to get there will be so much greater. Right? I know that the work that I've been doing for the last few years on the outside, it's kind of weird even for me to talk to people about, when I meet up with people and hey, how are you? How's the business? What's going on? It's hard for me to even talk sometimes because I'm well, on the surface, most of the things that people use as markers to talk about their business success, there's not a lot on the surface that people are seeing that feel wow, these big successes. But under the surface, whoa, the roots, the things that I have been learning, the things I've been taught, the things God's been strengthening and teaching me, wow. It's boom, 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 thing after thing after thing after thing. And I know and I trust that that is shaping me into the businesswoman I need to be in order to hold the magnitude of responsibility God's inviting me to step into with this work. If I would have gone the other route and maybe hit some of these other more superficial markers first, just because that's where I chose to focus, right? What I chose to do, bypassing what the Spirit's been saying, I'd have some, wonderful success. But just like I shared the other day in the parable of the seed, that type of success, it blooms quickly, but it doesn't get sustained. What's sustainable forever, what impacts generation after generation after generation, is when you've got those deep roots. And those deep roots come from living a life of faith, trusting that if you hear God, learn to submit to it, right? Learn to submit to his voice and submit quickly. The quicker you do, the better. The more you will be blessed. And that's what I'm learning right now. That's what he's working on me. He's Akwese, you clearly hear me and you are submitting to me. Now I want you to do it quicker. Right? No backtracking, no doubt, no, that's why I laughed. I was what am I doing? Why am I asking God to reconfirm when he's already spoken and he's already spoken so clearly? How do I move swiftly? And the more swiftly I can move on what God's calling me to do, the quicker I'll start seeing breakthroughs and miracles and abundance upon abundance upon abundance, because that's how God wants to work. And he gives more to those that he's seen as who've proven themselves worthy, right? So it's all about being a steward with what we have. How will you do that? How will you be a steward with what you have, with the insight and the clarity that God's given you, and saying, hey, go over here, hey, do this, even and especially when it doesn't make sense, and especially when you've got other good opportunities over here. I was talking with my brother the other day too, and he's in discernment about, like, does he want to stay with his job? Does he not want to stay at his job? And we've talked about this the last time we spoke. He was already kind of discerning, because he knew that this was going to be something that was coming up for him, a decision he would need to be making in the future. And he was leaning more towards staying, and it didn't make sense to me. But again, I'm an entrepreneur, right? Like, I've always been this highly visionary, highly like spirit-led, let me lean into risk as long as it's aligned with God's reward, right? As long as it's aligned with the kingdom and what I know he's speaking. And so for me, it was a no-brainer. Like, wait, why would you stay there for the safety when, like, you could go and like build this new thing, and like you think it would be fun and exciting and you'd love to do it, but like your only concern is like the uncertainty of the paycheck, right? Like of the security. But this one could give you so much more in the long run, but in the immediate, it just might take longer to get there, right? And that was something that he wasn't really willing to risk. He's like, yeah, I'd rather not have, like, it's like the potential didn't leave him as excited as it would for me, right? Because when I see that potential, I'm like, I know it's coming. Like, if I'm here, I know I won't give up on it. And so I know that it will eventually come, even if it takes 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, it will come, right? And that's enough for me, knowing the certainty of that. Again, where are we trusting? Where are we looking at certainty? Are we looking at it as in God's ultimate promise, or are we looking at it in the immediate? And the immediate being like what we think we need, right? Oh, but how am I going to get the money? Oh, how am I going to have food? Oh, how am I going to have shelter? It's uncertain. It's only uncertain if we're looking at it as these tangible things that we need in the world. But when we look at it from the kingdom, we know that the kingdom supersedes this world. Kingdom principles supersede our earthly laws. And so money, to buy a house, to have shelter, right? Like if the need is to have shelter and food and safety, we might think, oh, to have these things, I need money. And to have money, I need a job, right? And the job has to have this, consistent paycheck, whatever. That's not the case. We always need to focus on what's the need. The need is the food. Okay. Is God not the bread of life and living water? Okay. Did God not say, like, he is our home and our shelter and our strong foundation? So how are we trusting that God will provide? Do we really believe what we say we believe about who God is? And if we do, then it means acting on that faith, right? Like that's the key. Faith without works is dead. It's not really faith if you don't have to believe without seeing. If you don't have to trust what you know and act on that. And so I've gone all around. This is a longer episode again, but such is life. This is what you get today. I say all this, just to say, be mindful of the good. When you're hearing God's voice, know that the good will come as a test of your faith. And it's okay if you choose the good. We're human. We're going to choose it at times, but then come back and evaluate it, right? If there's still that part of you that's like, man, I wish I would have, you can still go back and choose different. And you can still evaluate, well, what did you learn from that? Right? What did you learn from that? What did you learn from that? But just remember that God has great things for you, but that in order to get great, you've got to learn how to say no to things that are good, but that aren't for you in this time, right? Just like I said, so many of my clients, they come, you have the people who are like, yes, at the burnout, that's its own thing. But the people that I now only work one-on-one with, right? Like before I would work one-on-one with anyone. If you're at like that burnout phase, it's like, okay, come to a retreat, come to some other space. But if we're really diving in, the best work we can do, my ideal client is moving from a place of okay or good to a place of great. We're moving from glory to glory. That's what we're called to do. From glory to glory. And that means recognizing that there's always more. And the more that's available for us is even greater than our minds could even begin to imagine. And therefore, if we see something that looks good, but our spirit is pulling us elsewhere, but something just feels off, trust that. Submit to that voice, to that slight tug. Submit to it and trust. Because it's often the good things that keep us comfortable and that keep us relying on our own strength or on other people's strength rather than on relying on God's, right? Because where God really steps in and shines is when we open ourselves, when we say, I can't do this on my own. Use me, God. I don't know how to do this. I'm nothing without you. That's all he wants to hear, because then we get out of our own way and then he can start using us, right? We get out of our own way. And so maybe that's what I should have called this, is get out of your own way. Get out of your own way. Think about all of the ways that you are getting in your own way. Playing it safe. Choosing what looks good on the surface because it feels certain and you like to have that control, right? I know I like to have control too, but ultimately, I want God to be in control because God is the only one in control. And my trying to fight that is only going to leave me frustrated. And so the quicker I can submit to that in not just mind, like, oh yeah, I know this. No, but like in body and in spirit, like making my body a slave to that rather than being a slave to my body. Like we have got to, what was I reading? Let me see if I can find it. It was really... It was really great. I think it was the other day's devotion. And it was about our bodies. Y'all, I might not be able to find this. Let me see. One moment. But okay, so I'm not finding it right now, but basically it was about, we have got to, when it comes to our bodies, okay, I really thought I could find it. I was like, wait, it's gotta be here. Whenever you're looking for something, that's when it's like hard to find, right? Okay, I said I was gonna just tell you, but I'm really trying to find it. Anyways, the whole idea was about our bodies. We need to tell them what to do, right? We need to tell our bodies what to do. If our body says, oh, here it is. Okay, I found it. It was in my notes. I was looking in my devotional instead of in my notes. Much of our misery in Christian life comes not because of the devil's attack, but because we never understood the simple laws of our makeup. We have to treat the body as the servant of Jesus Christ, right? Treating the body as the servant of Jesus Christ. And so what that means is that when the body says sit and Jesus says go, we need to go, right? When the body says sit, but Jesus says go, we need to go. We need to go. We need to listen. We need to submit and do what God's called us to do. If our body says, hey, I'm really tired, go to bed, and the spirit says, go speak to this person or call them, we need to submit to that spirit, right? That says, call this person. And I've been there before. I remember one time I was so exhausted and I just wanted to sleep, and something in my spirit said, call this person, call this person. And I was like, no, I want to sleep. And then I tried to sleep and I couldn't sleep because something in my spirit said, call this person, call this person, call this person. And then I was like, stop. Let me just sleep. I need to have it's already late. I still couldn't sleep. Finally, the third time. Threes are like a number for me. The third time I'm like, okay, I won't keep dismissing this. I called this person, and I don't even remember the conversation we had, but I do remember that it was necessary. We needed to have this. They needed to hear from me. There was something going on, and what I was speaking was what was going on in their life. What I felt imparted to share was what they needed to hear. And it was right when they needed to hear it. And that's the thing. Will I get out of my own way? Because my way, my flesh said, you're tired. Said, oh, well, this is going to inconvenience you. And this person talks. So if you talk to them, while you're in bed, it's not just going to be like a quick check-in. It's going to be longer. And, then you might not get sleep. And you like to talk too, Equaze. So once you start get rolling, you're not going to be able to stop. And then, you're going to have all this energy, right? And I said, no, I'm not going to talk myself out of this. Get out of your own way, Equaze. It's not about you. It's about being used. And so afterwards, of course, I praised God, right? Thank you, God, for this opportunity to connect, to be of service. And then I said, Lord, I've got 4 hours before I have to be up. I said, in the name of Jesus, let this sleep be the most restful sleep I have ever had. Supernatural sleep in the name of Jesus. And guess what? I woke up feeling so refreshed the next day. So refreshed, so alive. That's how God does it, y'all. That's how God does it. We have been given that authority, but we have got to use it, right? We've got to use it. And it starts with calling out our flesh and saying, no, my body can make sense of, this being the best way for me, right? And sleep is important, right? It is. But is it more important than God's will call? No. Money is important in this world, but is it the most important? No. God is, right? God is. So whether you're prioritizing the paycheck over God's voice, or you're prioritizing your sleep over God's voice, or you're prioritizing, your time, oh, well, I really just wanted to do this. And then God's like, no, but you should do this instead. How will you get out of your own way? Or if you've been, invited to speak, like for me, God said, start sharing. And then I make it a whole thing in my head. Oh, well, how am I going to start the podcast? And then I have to learn how to edit it. And, I need a jingle to open in the end or to play in the beginning and the end. It becomes this whole thing. And then I get anxiety and overwhelm. And then I end up, nothing happens, right? And God said, just speak and trust. And know that it doesn't have to be fancy. Know that it doesn't have to be, this mapped out script, but just do it. Submit to me. Die of your flesh, the part of you that wants to figure everything out and have everything this perfect plan. It's not going to be, but it will be my perfect plan. And guess what? My perfect plan will be even greater than what you could ever imagine as the most ideal thing. Do you trust that? First off, do you know that? And if you say yes, do you trust that? And if you say yes, okay, be about it. right? Everything in the kingdom is not just like an up here knowing. It's a beingness, right? It's about embodying the principles of the kingdom. It's about embodying God's character. And when we're open to the Spirit, to allowing it to move in and through us, only then can we be mirrors, showing other people God's glory, inviting them to experience the fullness of who He is, based on them experiencing the fullness of who we are as inheritors of the kingdom, as co-creators with God, as individuals made in the image of Christ, and therefore reflecting His nature, His character, but only when we are open. Because if we want to reflect Him, we've got to be open to Him, allowing Him to come in and fill us, allowing Him to come in and move through us, allowing Him to come in and take our body as a living sacrifice. So what do you need to lay down today and every day moving forward to get out of your own way, to stop prioritizing good so that you can prioritize God's great plans, and to surrender, to allow yourself, to give yourself permission to surrender to God's plans, especially when you likely do not know all of them. All you have is the first step, right? You've got that first tug, that first pull. Will you trust Him? Will you trust Him? Will you trust Him? So look for God, right? Be willing to look and see that God is here, that God is always here, that God is always speaking. Be willing to look and then to open yourself, ridding yourself of just your physical eyes, of your logical mind, but opening to the Spirit coming in you and operating through you. And then will you respond? Will you submit? And this is a practice. This is an actual practice, y'all. Because some days you're going to do it and other days you're not. And it doesn't mean that you lied when you did it before. It doesn't mean that you're, a bad person or you're incongruent. No, it just means you're human. And that's why this is a walk. We get back up again and again and again and again and again. We turn down one road and we say, ooh, don't really like this. So we turn back and we do things different. And if you want support on that walk, if you are walking that walk and you want to walk it more deeply, with more accountability, if you want to move at a quicker pace, and quicker meaning like in the spirit, not necessarily in the physical, you need community. You need a guide. You need support. You need to, gather yourself with others who are equally as committed to walking this with you. Why? Because this journey is not easy. What's easy in the world is listening to the voices. If you do today what is easy, your life will be hard. It's easy to listen to the voices that tell you to play small. The voices that say, oh, well, yeah, you don't really have anything to share. You don't know how you're going to share, so don't share. People could think you're crazy, right? That's easy to just say, okay, I'm not going to share. What's not easy is saying, I don't care if people think, wow, this is a 1 hour and 20 minutes she's been talking. Wow, I'm not going to listen to that. This is way too long. Or wow, she's like spoken all over the place. There's nothing here. This isn't concise. I don't care what people think. I don't. I mean, I'll be honest. I, as a human, of course, those things come up, but then I die of it. And I say, God, hey, help me not to let this matter, because I know it doesn't matter. And I have to remind myself, wait, Akwese, what do you believe matters? And I say, I believe only God matters. Okay, then why are you giving energy and weight just to somebody else? And I'm like, oh yeah, why? I'm doing that because of fear. I'm doing that of a belief that's rooted in me not being enough, but I actually don't believe that I'm not enough. I believe I am enough. And so what does it look like for me to operate from that belief, right? Again, I've got to die of and crucify these old habits, these old beliefs, these old conditioned things, these old conditioned patterns that I've just been operating from. I've got to do that. And that takes action. It takes consistency. And it takes a remembering that goes against the grain of our society, which is why surrounding yourself with others is so vital. In the beginning of any type of change in your life, your environment is often way more powerful than your willpower, right? Even in the Bible, it says our will, not by my will, but by yours. Not my will, yours, Lord. Not my strength, but yours. Our willpower is nothing. It's going to fail us because we're human. We will let ourselves down. Other people will let us down. That's human nature, to let down. Human nature. And so it's not by our will. It's God's will. It's God's will. So are we willing to switch our beliefs? Or to challenge, am I really acting out of the beliefs that I carry? Are we willing to do this work of choosing the hard things today in order for our life to be easy tomorrow? In order to have a life of complete freedom and ease and peace, which is our birthright as inheritors of the kingdom? Or are we not willing to make that temporary sacrifice because we don't want to give up what our eyes are seeing in this world, which ultimately is a lie, is a veil. It's a veil of truth, a veil covering the truth, right? Because the only truth is God. The only truth is love. The only truth is abundance. And if I don't operate from that place of abundance and belief in God and love as the ultimate in my oneness with Him, then I'm living out a lie. I am living out a lie. So get ready. Get ready to make this your year of no to good. Saying no to good. And you're saying no to good. Why? In order to have great. And trust me that you will. It might not look like that at first. Other people, don't talk to other people, mind you. Like don't even tell, unless they are on this journey with you, unless they are your, women of aligned and anchored, unless they are in this journey with you, walking in the same level of commitment, don't tell them what you're going through or where you're at. They won't get it. And them not getting it will be a source often of you, what's the word? Of you wavering in your faith, right? Because then you'll start to believe, oh, well, maybe they're right. Maybe I haven't done much. Maybe I am just a failure. No, surround yourself with other people who see the truth of you. Because then when you're in those moments, we'll remind you, hey, no, here's what I see. And guess what? I was in that same place that you are 3 months ago. And now look where I'm at, right? We need one another. And so if you're on this journey and you want community, you want aligned community, you want people to call you back to your highest self, you want people to remind you of who you are, you want that accountability, you want that encouragement, you want to have collective space of remembering and of practicing, because you know this is a practice that you must return to again and again and again and again. And you know it's not easy because we're going against the grain of this culture. We're going against the grain of what we've been conditioned to believe and how we've been conditioned to think. But you're tired of doing it alone. And you know that you can't get where you are aiming to get alone. Then join me. Join me. I would love to invite you into our community, our wider community of women in purpose and power, but more specifically our membership program, our community of practice. It's called Aligned and Anchored, and it's all about helping you align your life with your values and anchor in your faith, anchor in a belief that more is possible, and that more comes from walking in alignment, right, with your values, walking anchored to God's word and His leading, right, wherever that Spirit is guiding. So if that's you, join me. Go to akwese.com. That's AKWESE.com, AKWESE.com, and scroll down to find Aligned and Anchored, our membership, and sign up. Would love to have you. Anyways, I will end here. God bless. Have a wonderful day. If this spoke to you, I'd love to hear how, in what ways. And I invite you to share it with somebody else.